Greetings all, students, faculty, thesis advisors, thesis reviewers, and friends and family members. Thank you for joining us this evening for the Johns Hopkins Master of Arts in Science Writing Program's fall semester thesis reading. My name is Melissa Hendricks, and I'm the program director of the Johns Hopkins MA in Science Writing Program. Students in this program are dedicated. They spend from 18 months to 5 years developing their skills in science reporting and writing. That includes courses in science journalism, essay writing, and climate change communication. Those years of hard work culminate in a thesis course where they take what they've written and make it shine brightly enough to merit publication. Indeed, many students do publish their work, including, and here's a shameless plug, in the program's own publication, The Science Writer, thesciencewriter.org. As talented as our students are, they had help from several important people I'd like to acknowledge. First, our thesis advisors who mentor our students, and the faculty who review thesis manuscripts. My sincere thanks for all that you do. Second, a warm round of applause to all our faculty. And next, I'd like to honor a very special group. Those are the spouses, partners, children, parents, and friends of our students who cheered on this group along the way. Thank you sincerely. This year's been an eventful one around the world, perhaps more eventful than we would like. Elections, wars, threatening new viruses, more natural disasters from climate change. Who can make sense of all of this? Well, it falls to the writer. We write to make sense of chaos, and it's been that way forever. A few weeks after this recent election, a Johns Hopkins archaeologist reported some findings at a conference for Near East scholars. This archaeologist, Glenn Schwartz, and his colleagues have been studying the contents of an ancient tomb dating back to 2400 BCE, discovered in what we now call Syria. When archaeologists first explored the tomb, they found 6 skeletons of what appeared to be members of a wealthy family. The family had their things laid about them, jewelry, pottery, and other things. But most interesting of all, small clay cylinders about the length of a finger. Those lay among the household goods. Glenn Schwartz studied markings on these cylinders, and at the conference in November, he reported a remarkable discovery. He believes the markings are alphabetic symbols, letters that form words. If Schwartz is correct, his finding pushes back the oldest known evidence of alphabetic writing by 500 years. Before the alphabet, people used hieroglyphics or cuneiform, drawing a symbol to represent a thing, an object, or a phonetic sound. But those symbols were laborious. A society might have thousands of different symbols. But with an alphabet like our 26 symbols, communication becomes much simpler, more efficient. Here's what Schwartz says, quote, "Alphabets revolutionized writing by making it accessible to people beyond royalty and the socially elite." And he adds, "Alphabetic writing changed the way people lived, how they thought, how they communicated. Elections, wars, governments, perhaps even climate change come and go. But writing, that most remarkable human invention, endures. Although we might change its form and tools from clay cylinders to papyrus to pixels on a screen, people continue to yearn to record information and stories." And that brings us to these students, carrying on that uniquely human tradition in their writing and now by sharing their stories with us. The 11 authors you're about to hear will take us to different geographic places, from tide pools to the heavens. They'll also explore some emotional terrain. What's common to all of them is a desire to sort out just what it means to be human. In doing so, these students are heirs to those first storytellers who spun tales around a campfire thousands of years ago. And to start off our storytelling, I am pleased to introduce our first reader, Sarah Hartnett.
Good evening. Tonight I'm reading excerpts from a hopefully humorous essay titled The Conqueror Worm, or How I Learned to Start Worrying and Fear the Nematode. Consider the nematode. Nematodes make up over 80% of all animal life on the planet. There are about 60 billion nematodes for every single human on Earth. Most of these humble roundworms are microscopic soil dwellers that live and die in obscurity beneath our feet. But some have gone a more dramatic route. Placentonemo gigantissima, an intestinal parasite of sperm whales, grows up to 30 feet long. Incidentally, about the length of the largest living snake, the green anaconda, which has a reputation for swallowing, among other things, entire jaguars. There is something deeply unsettling about a worm the size of an apex predator gulping snake. After all, we humans have our own cohort of parasitic nematodes. Pinworms are the most cosmopolitan of these, a descriptor that brings to mind a classy worm in a sharp pantsuit, but just means they get around in tight-packed environments thanks to, quote, uncontrolled anus-finger-mouth contact, an actual medical term used to explain why 10 to 60% of preschoolers are walking pinworm incubators. Genetic sequencing suggests nematodes emerged from the primordial ooze over 1 billion years ago, and since then they haven't deviated significantly from their basic tube-within-a-tube blueprint. But it turns out you don't need to be super complex to have superpowers. In 2015, Japanese researchers discovered that a nematode called C. elegans can detect human cancer. Normal human urine is a worm deterrent, but at a soupçon of cancer, and apparently nematodes can't resist it, volatile organic compounds emitted by cancer cells are delicious worm nip. Sure, dogs are pretty good at sniffing out cancer too, but dogs have over 100 million nerve ends in their nasal cavities. C. elegans has 302 neurons in its entire nervous system. And research-wise, worms are low maintenance. You don't have to walk them or give them treats, and there's a whole lot less ethics paperwork involved. Actually, this last consideration gives me pause. When worms conquer the world, we may regret our callous attitude. Nematodes love the smell of our suffering. They are not our friends. And they might be functionally immortal. Several nematode species develop into a larval form called the dower worm, which sounds like a dragon in a fantasy saga. But dower is simply German for enduring, because these babies are marathon survivalists. Dower larvae also perform a neat trick called nick-taking, where they stand up on their tails and dance about, looking for hosts. It's surprisingly endearing to watch, like a wiggly little rave. But it gets cooler. Nick-taking dowers leap onto passing hosts by surfing through the air on electric waves. But most of the time, dowers shut down and sit tight in a sort of suspended animation called cryptobiosis that allows them to withstand toxic environments for weeks or months. Or millennia? In 2018, Russian scientists dug a pair of nematodes out of ancient Siberian permafrost and managed to reanimate them. Both worms were female, but happily with a parthenogenic persuasion, so they could and did reproduce asexually before dying a natural worm death. The researchers studied the surviving offspring through 100 generations. The results were shocking. The original specimens weren't a modern contaminant. They were 46,000 years old, frozen in time since the Pleistocene. It feels a little anticlimactic that they squirmed back to life, reproduced, and promptly died, but I suppose it's for the best. I've watched enough science fiction movies. Nothing good comes of thawing out ancient life forms. It's hard to shake the suspicion those worms crawled right into the Russian scientists' ears and are covertly orchestrating global chaos. But as impressive as nematodes are, I don't think we can blame humankind's bad behavior on superpowered parasites. Not yet, anyway. Or maybe that's exactly what the worms want us to think. All right, I'm going to pass it over to my classmate, Ashley Atkinson. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. Fantastic job with your reading. Hi, everyone. My name's Ashley, and I will be reading a modified, shorter version of my personal essay titled Don't Sweat It. A classmate passed me the micropipette after loading their DNA sample into the gel. This could be the beginning of my career as a geneticist, I remember thinking. I placed my right elbow on the lab table exactly as my teacher had demonstrated and used my left hand to stabilize my grip on the micropipette. Time slowed as I prepared to press down on the micropipette, shooting the DNA downward. Suddenly, I became acutely aware of the sweat pooling in the folds of my gloves, and my hands made squeaking noises as I adjusted my position. Despite my focus and despite what I wanted the moment to be, when I pressed the trigger within my glove, my thumb slid against the nitrile and off the pipette, nudging it to the left. I had missed the well. I would not get to see my DNA sample under the UV light, and it was far from the first time something like this had happened. Hyperhidrosis is a condition characterized by excessive sweating. Individuals with hyperhidrosis sweat even when they're resting or in cold temperatures. We are constantly leaking. Usually, hyperhidrosis affects the hands, feet, underarms, or face. Some people report their hyperhidrosis starting alongside puberty, but my mom says she remembers me having sweaty hands and feet as a baby. Around 4.8% of the US population has been diagnosed with hyperhidrosis. Still, it can be a lonely life. Hyperhidrosis has been shown to impact the mental health, self-esteem, and social interactions of those it affects. Most people don't think about sweat too often, but those of us with hyperhidrosis are always acutely aware of how much we're oozing. It makes us both physically and mentally miserable. In addition to the shame and lack of self-confidence that often comes with this condition, people with hyperhidrosis are much more likely to have anxiety or depression. I have generalized anxiety, and when I sweat, my anxiety gets worse. But of course, the more anxiety I get, the more I sweat. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. Even as I went on to study genetics in college, I continued to struggle with my lab classes. But I was still enamored with all the knowledge that life sciences could offer me. How could I not want to explore our own building blocks, our microscopic legacy? I wasn't sure if I belonged in a world I couldn't fully participate in, but at the same time, I couldn't imagine myself anywhere else. So I pushed on and I became an undergraduate learning assistant for chemistry lectures. It was then I realized that my favorite part about the life sciences was communicating and sharing it with others. I used technology to my advantage. I invested in an iPad and an Apple Pencil so I could show my work to students without smearing, and I projected my screen onto the board to avoid struggling with Expo marker caps. I also had all the practice problems and solutions on my iPad, opting to show students my screen instead of holding and wetting paper copies. Empowered by how I could contribute to the world of life sciences outside the laboratory, I took a remote position as a program assistant for a research organization focused on improving equity and inclusion in STEM introductory courses. With a silicone keyboard cover, a powerful fan on my desk, and a hand towel, I can support projects with my science communication skills to make changes in STEM classes and departments. I can help make the fields of study that I love better for all who seek to join them. I can make change in the world while interacting with it in a way that is accessible to me. Thank you for listening to my piece. I am pleased to introduce our next reader, Claire Hendershot.
Thanks, Ashley. I'm Claire, and I'll be reading the introductory segment of Green Genesis, Environmental Considerations for Death Care in America. Katrina Spade grins with pride as she slides open the warehouse gate to unveil her architecture career's magnum opus. Behind her, hexagonal pods tower toward the ceiling, arranged in a honeycomb structure resembling a cyberpunk beehive. The pod exteriors gleam with the modern sterility of an Apple store, a shock of white in the gaping gray maw of the warehouse. Potted plants decorate the honeycomb's base, pops of green hinting at the verdant life blooming within. The tightly compacted pods mimic a capsule hotel, and that's precisely what Spade has designed, a clean and comfortable inn. However, these quarters have some unconventional rules. Guests are bound to a mandatory 30-day stay, after which they can never return. Former guests are often scattered across the grounds of Bell's Mountain, the protected forest wilderness surrounding Spade's Seattle area facility. Spade is the founder and CEO of Recompose, the world's first human composting funeral home. Her facility serves as a hotel for the dead and a memorial for the living. Human composting is breathing life into death care, an industry that hasn't changed much in the US since the 1960s. Before Recompose's launch in 2019, residents of most states could only choose among a handful of funeral arrangements: burial, cremation, or donation of a body to science. These limited options for death care and the absence of any options that's both eco-friendly and feasible at scale disillusioned Spade. Before founding Recompose, Spade was an architecture student at UMass Amherst who envisioned a death care industry that would allow the body to return to the earth without squandering land or polluting the atmosphere. She imagined a more spiritually meaningful funeral process that connects the end of life to the cycles of nature rather than severing them. I think that by communicating how the soil is transformed and used after composting, it gives deeper meaning to the end of life, said Spade. Composting is more than putting banana peels and leftover coffee grounds in a separate waste receptacle. It's the process by which microbes convert organic matter into nutrient-enriched soil. This newly generated soil, or compost, is a natural fertilizer that's highly favorable for plant life. At Recompose, composting begins by placing a human body in the vessel with wood chips, straw, and other organic material. This environment mimics the forest floor, where deceased animals naturally decompose and transform into fertile soil that's ready to nourish life. The damp, aerated composting vessel creates the perfect conditions for bacterial decomposers, which break down nitrogen-rich organic material and release carbon dioxide and heat as byproducts. These tiny microbes release so much heat that the vessel interior reaches more than 131 degrees Fahrenheit, which is hot enough to kill any pathogens. After 6 weeks, the body has been fully composted into nutrient-dense soil. The rise of Recompose reflects Americans' evolving views of environmentalism and its role in a meaningful death. These shifting values mark a stark departure from the traditional death care industry, which has been long dominated by embalming, formal caskets, and expensive ceremonies. As Earth faces increasing environmental challenges, some people seek a more sustainable and thoughtful approach to their final rites. Some may ask, what does it mean to die well in a world grappling with ecological uncertainty? Human composting offers a fitting funeral option for a changing cultural landscape, much like the death care practices of America's bygone eras. End scene. Next up, I'm pleased to introduce Charlotte Stevenson.
Thanks, Claire. That was great. Hi, I'm Charlotte. I will be reading an essay titled Learning from the Lowly Lichen, as you can see behind me, about being a better human, which I published this fall with the Center for Humans and Nature on new groundbreaking discoveries in the world of lichenology. Yes, that's a thing. I'll be reading an excerpt from the middle of the piece. Honestly, I can't blame Linnaeus or others for misidentifying or misclassifying lichens. During my first weeks looking for lichen behind my house in the Sierra Nevada mountains, I misidentified fungus, moss, gum, sap, rocks, and spray paint. My 8-year-old daughter, Lark, became adept at identification, classifying lichens under her own nomenclature with names like ice booger, cracky cracker, and orange candy teeth. Although initially offended at her dismissal of our lichen guidebook, I discovered I was the one being narrow-minded. Lichen names are wild. Some California species with names like warty camouflage, woolly foam, and rock licorice barely stand out as eccentric in lichen land. Over several months, I went from barely knowing lichen existed to seeing them everywhere. Trees, rocks, the sidewalk, fences, abandoned cars. It's interesting how the unnoticeable become noticeable once we learn more about them. But the learning process wasn't without difficulty. More than once, I came up from kneeling on the ground, having had my eye inches from the sidewalk, to see people staring skeptically. And telling them I was just looking at a lichen didn't help. As I improved at identifying this miniature world, this scape of crusting colors and small tufty towers rising from the bark of ponderosa pine, I lost track of my own world. Scanning branches overhead, I tripped over roots. Perched on coastal boulders with a magnifying glass, I didn't notice the incoming tide until it salted my ankles. It was as if my brain could only operate on one scale of awareness, one scale of living. In being like a lichen, I couldn't function as a human. The oldest lichen fossils date back 300 to 400 million years, meaning they survived or re-evolved after several of Earth's mass global extinctions. The oldest living lichen is one of the oldest living things on Earth, and it's a species in the Rhizocarpon genus. Its pale yellow crust dotting the Brooks Range in Arctic Alaska for the past 10,000 years. The other record holders also push tens of thousands of years and include colonial species of plants, like a 200,000-year-old seagrass meadow in the Mediterranean, an 80,000-year-old grove of all male aspen trees in Utah, and a 13,000-year-old Yoruba oak grove in California. Clearly, there's something to this strategy of coexistence and cooperation that works. Living in our fast-paced, disposable, single-use society, where life expectancy continues to drop in many countries, including the United States, I'm humbled by lichen. While lichen live for thousands of years in all extremes on Earth, succeeding at interspecies and even inter-kingdom cooperation, humans still struggle to coexist with all other life on this planet. We even struggle at peace within our own species. 10,000 years ago, when that pale yellow lichen began growing in Alaska, we were well on our way into propelling what many scientists now call Earth's sixth great extinction event. And I will pause there. Thank you. Our next reader is Ananya Palivela, and she is coming to us all the way from India.
Hello. I'll be reading the beginning of a news article called An X-ray of the Milky Way Galaxy. In the vast expanse of space, a fundamental particle, a neutrino, travels in silence, almost never interacting with anything we know of and invisible to all. Born at the heart of a supermassive black hole or some other cataclysmic cosmic event, it journeys through the cosmos almost at the speed of light, unhindered by the countless particles that litter its path. A few of these many billions of ghostly particles meet their end in a dim flash of light, illuminating an ice cube the size of a football stadium at the South Pole. Filled with well-placed detectors and fittingly named the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory. The dust around black holes and galaxies scatters so much light that standard telescopes cannot see beyond it. Neutrinos, due to their non-interactive nature, enable us to see beyond the dust and observe galaxies and celestial bodies that we would otherwise be unable to see. With the help of IceCube, Dr. Naoko Kurahashi-Nielsen has mapped the Milky Way galaxy entirely using neutrinos. This produced a picture of our galaxy that we have never seen before. Nielsen, a particle physicist at Drexel University, has been working at the IceCube Observatory in Antarctica for over 10 years, along with hundreds of scientists from around the world. Unlike most telescopes that use light or photons to see the universe, IceCube uses neutrinos. Photons and neutrinos are both fundamental particles. When you look up at the night sky, there are photons coming from every star all the way across space, says Nielsen. They travel millions of miles to hit our eyeballs, and that's where they end. It's how you know that there's a star there. Most light-based telescopes work the same way. With the help of lenses and mirrors, they can see further than the human eye. For the telescope at IceCube, which works with neutrinos, the mirrors and lenses are replaced with detectors that show images on a computer screen. If the typical telescope produces a picture of the universe, the neutrino observatory produces an X-ray, says Dr. Christina Love, a physicist at Drexel University. Neutrinos are difficult to detect since they rarely interact with matter. However, IceCube tackles this by literally using a giant cube of ice. Owing to its high density, ice makes such a great environment for neutrino interactions. And what place is better for such a thing than Antarctica? Nielsen says, I've always wanted to go there. And thanks to IceCube, she did. The telescope collects most of its data during the polar winter, when planes don't land or take off. Only about 40 scientists and staff are left at the base for 5 months a year, and the base is wholly isolated. You don't see another soul, or even the sun, she says. When you're in Antarctica, you're standing on 2 miles of ice. We drilled detectors into the bottom third of this ice where it's pitch black, says Nielsen. Due to its dense nature, high-energy neutrinos from space strike the atoms in the ice and break down into an array of highly energetic particles that radiate light. The detectors then easily catch this light that entered the utterly dark area. A machine learning algorithm reconstructs where the neutrinos came from by looking at what detectors are lighting up when and how intense the light is. And with this, researchers are trying to map out patterns across the universe. So that was the beginning. Thanks for listening. I introduce the next reader, Anne Hilden.
Thank you, Ananya, and hello, everyone. I am excited to read to you an excerpt from a long-form essay titled "To Love and Understand What is Beautiful, The Roses of Wick." The essay is mostly a historical narrative about a woman named Jane Bown Haynes, who lived about 200 years ago. And she lived only a few miles away from my house in Philadelphia. The essay is also about the rose garden she planted, which still blooms today. In 1824, Jane's oldest daughter, Sarah, fell ill. First, Sarah developed a cough, then a slight fever with headaches and nausea that persisted for weeks. The family doctor's medicines, calomel and rhubarb pills, acetate of ammonia, concoction of Seneca, did nothing to help her. The doctor's treatments, bleeding from her head and burning her skin to make blisters, worsened her fever. Over the course of several days, 11-year-old Sarah progressed through babbling delirium into sullen silence into unresponsive sleep. Jane's own written account depicts the following scene. The girl struggles, scratching at the raw blisters on her arms, crying out. Her doctor, mother, and father apply a poultice, while her aunt and grandmother try to keep her calm. Once the bandages are on, the girl sinks back into her pillows, instantly sound asleep. She has not eaten solid food in days, and her mouth is scarily dry and black. The father and aunt sit on either side of the girl's bed to keep watch, while the others get some rest. Then her breathing changes. The aunt rushes to rouse the mother, who calls the doctor. In a cold dread, they watch the small sleeping form. Through the night, they keep her lips moistened with a feather. In a final attempt to help, the doctor applies hot plaster to the girl's legs to raise more blisters, hoping to draw disease-causing poison out of her body. This time, she doesn't move a single muscle. Quote, we sat silently around the bed, gazing on the sweetly composed face and watching the gently lessening breath. The last that escaped her lips was at 10:15, end quote, says Jane's personal elegy. Despite her bereavement, Jane persevered as a wife and mother. Wick House, preserved as a museum today, is full of objects she touched and letters she wrote, leaving clues to the everyday realities of her life. Jane recorded recipes for dishes such as apple jelly and potted chicken in neat handwriting in a small book with her name embossed on the cover. She baked New Year's cakes in a decorative mold she had brought to Philadelphia as a newlywed. She kept locks of her children's hair in little folded paper packets in a keepsake box. She recorded logs of house expenses and lists of all her silver tableware. While she employed nurses and governesses, she remained involved in her children's educations, teaching them to read and sew. She delighted in their accomplishments, such as when Sarah had developed a talent for drawing. But heartbreak was not done with Jane yet. On a Wednesday in October 1831, her husband, Reuben, attended a meeting at the Academy of Natural Science in Philadelphia, where he had served as secretary for 17 years. He appeared to be in perfect health. Later that day, he died in his home of a laudanum overdose. Laudanum, a tincture of opium, was a popular drug at the time for relieving pain and loosening the mind. Reuben used it now and then to self-medicate the melancholy he sometimes felt. Jane inherited an estate worth $7 million in today's dollars, and all the responsibility that came with it. At 39 years old, she was a widow, and she was pregnant for the 9th time. Stripped bare by tragedy, Jane was like a rose stripped of its petals. Suddenly, the trappings of her life, so carefully curated, no longer mattered. But a rose without petals can still bear fruit. And with that, it is now my pleasure to introduce the next reader, Amy Moore.
Wow, thank you, Anne. I'm going to read excerpts from from what was an attempt at a podcast. It's titled Secrets of Tideful Love Lives. From afar, waves crumble and unfurl sheaths of water toward the shore. Sheltered among shoreline boulders and rocks, tide pools rise and fall with the waves' rhythm. Each wave crash refreshes the clear and cool water. The frilly fronds of lovely Gracilaria gracilis undulate in the shallow water. The scene is ripe for romance, and the red algae, as she is commonly called, is ready for some action. She waits, swaying in the coastal tide pool's gently rocking water. Unfortunately, all she can do is wait. Put yourself in her shoes, or stock, as it were, anchored to the seafloor in a shallow tide pool. Your delicate red fronds tremble gently as each wave empties and replenishes your pool. You'd like to get together with your male friend, who, as luck would have it, is anchored a few inches or feet away. He's not going anywhere, and neither are you. Without contact, you have little hope for making baby algae. His sperm lack tails for swimming to you, and your eggs are stuck inside your thallus, as the stalk of an alga is inelegantly called. What's a gal to do? In the absence of online dating apps, how are you going to connect with him? Red algae must rely on luck for the water's movement to bring the male sperm, what we think of as pollen, to the female eggs, or so scientists thought. Recently, a team of scientists tucked into a small lab in the middle of Paris created a love shack for Gracilaria to get a peek at how red algae reproduces. To their surprise, the passive beauty gets a little help from a rather nebbish crustacean, Idotea baltica. What, you might be wondering, is an Idotea? It's a tiny marine creature that resembles a louse. Idoteas are a marine isopod, that is, an invertebrate like crabs and shrimps. In pictures, Idoteas look like a cross between brine shrimp and lice. In real life, the males are about as long as a paperclip, and females a sunflower seed. Idoteas are pollinators. Biologist Miriam Valero and her team knew that water currents transport male sperm to female red algae. She wondered whether pollination occurred under other circumstances, such as with the aid of animals or insects. Replicating this coastal tide pool in saltwater aquariums, Valero's team conducted 2 experiments. In the first experiment, one aquarium had only male and female red algae, while the other contained both sexes of the algae and our friends, Idoteas. Fertilization occurred in both aquariums, but the success rate was about 20 times higher in the aquarium containing Idoteas. In the second experiment, only female red algae were placed in calm saltwater aquariums, one with Idoteas carrying the male sperm and one without Idoteas. Fertilization was successful in the aquarium with Idoteas, despite the absence of male algae, confirming that the sperm-carrying Idoteas fertilized the females. Using a laser scanning microscope, the team took beauty shots of the humble Idoteas, whose legs and bodies were studded with sticky, mucus-covered pollen. In the underwater environment, visibility is limited, colors are muted, scents diffuse. And red algae lack flowers and nectar. Their slippery, gelatinous surface and pale coloring wouldn't attract butterflies and bees. How then does red algae attract Idoteas? Enter the epiphyte, unwitting aphrodisiac to this unique underwater ménage à trois. Epiphytes colonize the fronds of red algae. These minuscule plants rely on the algae for support and profit from their nutrient-rich stalks. Epiphytes give back to their hosts in a unique sacrificial way. Like a lover who offers her beloved delicacies, the red algae attracts Idoteas with opportunistic epiphytes. All is fair in love and war if you're a Gracilaria. Idoteas munch on epiphytes and clean the alga's stalk. As Idoteas feed off the epiphytes, mucus-covered pollen from the male red alga stick to their legs. Foraging from stalk to stalk, Idoteas deliver pollen to the female red algae. A fringe benefit, her undulating fronds provide Idoteas with support and protection. In the tide pool, as in real-world romance, there are wins and losses, but for the delicate red algae and ugly Idotea, their unique living situation guarantees each their survival and that of their fragile coastal marine homes. Thank you. And now I'm going to pass it to my classmate, Jeffrey Rose.
Thank you. This is a short fiction short story that's based on true events. It's the introduction of the piece. He's running again. Wiry arms and legs emerge from the doorway, pumping furiously to pick up speed. He tried to stay and count and breathe, but his mind screamed, "Get out!" Out the door, down the chip brick steps. He sprints in his socks to the stone courtyard. He crosses the driveway and begins picking his way over the rusty barbed wire fence draped between tilting fence posts. He curses his parents. They aren't even his real parents, for sending him to the ranch. The Cadillac engine revs from the garage. He breaks free of the fence and sprints to the blacktop of the entrance road. Wet feet slap the asphalt. Icy needles sting his cheeks. Sparse clumps of skinny pines and leafless paper birch trees dot the snowdrifts ahead of him. His lungs burn as he sucks in frigid air. He glances back at the ranch's highlighter yellow, two-story house sitting on the hill above him. The garage door winds in the cinder block building just below. He should have stopped in a clump of thicker trees. He strains to find a spot where the road edge drops away. He hears the engine roar to life and the tires crunch in the gravel-strewn pavement. Desperate, he throws himself headlong into a ditch. His hands and knees flat against rocks beneath the snow. Panting, he scrambles underneath the thick white blanket. Melting snow trickles down the back of his shirt. The car accelerates. He holds his breath. He remembers holding his breath in the swimming pool in Florida. He would count to 20 if he could stand it. Then he would explode through the surface, gasping for air. The warm, soft air greeted him, gently drawing the water away. The sun darkened his skin till it cracked and turned the color of tobacco. When he felt the sun or the air or the water, he felt safe. He moved there with his 3 brothers and sister when he was adopted. He had his own bed, clean clothes, and he got to help make cookies. His new parents, his Florida parents, said they loved him, but they didn't. They didn't help him when he got angry or did bad things. They blamed him for it. He was fine in Brazil. He had hustled for food in the streets since he was 5. He found enough to feed his brothers and his sister when his parents disappeared. Then someone called the police and everything changed. They landed in an orphanage and his parents skipped out on rehab instead of trying to get him back. His lungs begin to burn. He squeezes his eyes for a few more seconds, and ever so slowly he lets out his breath. The sound of the car grows faint. He is cold and wet now. He brushes off the snow and slowly climbs up the bank on his hands and knees till he's level with the road. His feet are numb, but it's better that way. He waits a moment, dizzy, and watches his breath melt. A sharp breeze scrapes across the snow surface, sending flurries into tiny swirls before they settle again. Cold air pulls tears from his eyes. He hates the yellow house. His Florida parents sent him there to get better, whatever that means. His time outside is supposed to be healing, but it's not. The mountain trails tempt him to jump, and when he gets in trouble, he's forced to take long, lonely 16-mile walks along the road. They tell him the motion will exhaust the chemical storm in his brain, but the storm descends again. He turns and starts trotting along the road, shivering in his faded red hoodie and jeans. He tries to shake the water out of his curly black hair and wishes the ranch was closer to where the horses were kept. They scare him, but he would love to ride one now. He spent hours leading them around in circles, trying to keep them calm. If only he could remain calm. He needs to get to the library in town to find Whitney. She can make it better. She understands. Bill, driving the black Cadillac, fishtails the car into a U-turn across the wet pavement. The engine whines as the car leaps back in the opposite direction. He runs his fingers through his close-cropped blonde hair. His thick arms and chest stretch beneath a flannel shirt. He looks over at Jeremy, who's searching for a contact number in his phone. Damn him, I don't see him anywhere. I bet he's heading to Whitney, Jeremy says. His thick, calloused fingers find the right name. The phone disappears beneath his shoulder-length black hair. Whitney, it's Jeremy. Matt took off again. He was arguing with one of the boys, and I went to break it up, and please, let me know if you see him. Thanks. He's only 14, and what is this, 5 or 6 escapes? Bill asks, squinting at the stick-figured trees sliding past them. Maybe 6. Do you regret letting him come here? Jeremy asks. He shrugs out of his seatbelt and his wool-lined corduroy jacket. Hot air blasts from the car's vents, clearing the mist from the windshield. No, Bill says, shaking his head. He's why we're here. Next stop, prison if we can't reach him. Do you regret coming to work here? Jeremy pauses, tangling the ends of his fingers in his short beard. Yeah, sometimes. I was an asshole when I was younger, but not like these kids. Bill nods and says they push you to the brink. Why the escape to see Whitney? She sees the best in him, the person he could be without the mess. Is that your secret too? No, I'm just trying not to be an asshole back to them. Next, I'd like to introduce Hannah Stewart.
Thank you very much. Tonight I'm going to read an excerpt from a personal essay titled Flying Turtles, Screaming Seals, and Decomposing Whales. Nature documentaries only ever show the pretty sides of nature. Orange and pink coral reefs, fuzzy baby animals with oversized paws, verdant forests, and sunsets in every color of the rainbow. A few programs might use footage of a lion killing a gazelle, but even then, the cinematography cuts away from the worst of the violence and most of the gore. From an environmental advocacy point of view, I understand the value of presenting nature as something that must be protected rather than feared and destroyed. The average person won't want to protect endangered lions after seeing how a pride shreds its prey. The pretty serves a bigger picture goal. However, it's important to remember that humans do not exist at the top of any food chain. On a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 represents the primary producers, aka plants, and 5 represents true apex predators such as orcas and tigers, humans only rank as a 2.2. In fact, this is the same ranking as anchovies. Plenty of species are willing and able to look a human in the eye and say, "Fight me." One of those species is the harbor seal. The first time I saw a harbor seal up close and personal, I was a 17-year-old summer intern volunteering for the New York Riverhead Foundation. We rescued and treated sick or injured marine mammals and sea turtles. One of those patients was not so affectionately known as Wolverine. An adult male harbor seal, Wolverine measured 6 feet long and weighed about 300 pounds. I worked with Wolverine and about a dozen other seals for about 12 weeks. I say this next part with both affection and brutal honesty. Harbor seals are absolute bastards. They are intelligent problem solvers who understand exactly how big they are, and they're not afraid to throw their weight around. They may be round and squishy with big watery eyes and perch adorably on the ledge in their tanks, but if you walk past their window, they will scream. They don't feel well, and they made sure to let us know. Now might be a good time to mention that on the 1 to 5 scale, where humans rank the same as anchovies, harbor seals are a 4.3. Treating Wolverine required up-close physical examinations. Due to the limited range of movement in the seal's neck, the safest way to administer his meds was to ride him like a rodeo bull. However, Wolverine had a special trick in his repertoire. He discovered that humans couldn't stay close to him if he spun in an alligator death roll. That spherical, blubbery, wet root would flop and curl and shake until he dislodged you, and it almost always worked. I still have the scars from when I couldn't get out of his way fast enough. But perhaps the least pretty detail about working with real, unphotoshopped animals are the necropsies, which are similar to autopsies for humans. One morning, I received a 2 a.m. call to suit up and report to Fire Island to aid in the necropsy of a 28-foot-long juvenile male humpback whale. As an intern with zero medical training, the lead veterinarian tasked me with cutting through and peeling back the blubber so that she could evaluate the organs below. Instead of a scalpel, I used a machete as long as my forearm and a 20-foot pole with a metal hook on the end. For hours, I had to use my entire body weight to saw through several inches of blubber. I remember being surprised at first by how manageable the smell was. The fish that we fed to the seals had a stronger odor. This changed once the sun rose and the body had a couple of hours to bake in the sun. The smell worsened when our lead marine biologist cut open the stomach. She was looking for evidence of suffocation due to plastic ingestion. By the time the sun set, the carcass barely resembled a whale anymore. We had stripped the skull to the bone and found fractures consistent with a ship strike. The decomposition rate indicated that the strike had occurred only a few hours earlier. A bulldozer and excavator drove onto the beach to dig a grave for the body. That wasn't pretty either. It was a quiet ride on the ferry back to our cars. I love animals, wildlife, and the environment, and I intend to spend the rest of my life fighting for their protection. But nature isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's important to recognize that too. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Please allow me to introduce our next reader this evening, Sarah Aldrich.
Thank you. Really good job. Some background context for my piece that I'll be reading. I did my residency course last summer in Missoula, Montana, and I actually grew up 4 hours west of there. I'd left for college, moved to Oregon, and hadn't really been back until then in the Inland Northwest for 8 years. And that return inspired this lyric essay titled An Ode to Missoula, Montana. In some ways, I am like a swan. Trumpeter swans were nearly extirpated from the Northwest in the early 20th century, wiped like fog from a window for feathers, pelts, and flesh in the land they nested on. Writers were writing with swan feather quills. Could they feel the weight of lives taken on the parchment? How heavy is a soul? How dark is its shadow? In the late 1990s, about the same time I coalesced, not reel to reel, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes led swan reintroduction efforts. 19 swans were imported from Oregon and released in Montana, ghostly birds returning to ancestral nests. I leave the shadow behind, step into the light, and I think the sky still knows me. Montana greets me, hot and reaching, like I'm a child come home. I know it, too, and the Keystone Country, tucked away in the corner, knows no human borders. There's so much knowing between us. I could cry. Long day, overbearing shimmers nuzzle up, here to dye everything nostalgia golden, to drink my blood, bid me welcome, lay me low. Mother rays turned stranger's son in the interim. I'm sorry I was gone. The channeled scablands raised me. They're so close I can taste them. Wheat and pine and desolation are in my sour stomach like greens down a swan's gullet, and I think I need something my soul calls home. Connection makes things whole, and somewhere along the way I lost a piece in all the loathing. I don't think I meant it. All the leaving makes me hungry. I write like I ache for food I must grow myself, but I forget to water the garden. There's no one to remind me, and I'm busy, in conversation with wallpaper and books in the dark. I whisper to myself and I don't answer. What's the point? I'm a prion here now, chronic wasting, waiting for a scientist to cull me from the herd. I'm the tumbleweed, turning across the baseball field in my hometown. I used to pick them up when I was small and run into the wind, hoping it would catch like a kite and I'd fly away like Mary Poppins. When my father said it was time to leave, I'd let it go and watch it soar without my weight to hold it down. Then he'd help me into the back seat and we'd go home for lunch. His truck smelled like infield clay. Mom made tuna fish sandwiches. I was safe. Knowing Tumbleweeds are invasive, tarnishes the memory. Such simplicity, playing with the potential for rooting, for choking, for death of belonging. Where's the innocence now? Fled somewhere I can't follow? In the end, the first round of swans flew back to Oregon, and so must I. And while the spruce and columbines have welcomed me in, I'm not theirs. I want to be, but when I'm here, I speak my birth tongue, flaking rust like old blood. Dry grass, and sagebrush, and fine dust, and volcanic ash, and combine fires, and gravel road, riding in a truck bed beneath the yawning stars. And we have to close the windows before the dust storm hits, so we'll never get dirt out of the carpet. And the coyotes killed my friend's cat, and my classmate Pedro wrapped his car around a pole, and my mother woke me with the news, and I'm snowballing through the rolling hills of the Palouse until I am silent. Speaking feels futile. Fire season gets longer every year, and the horizon is hazy, thick with smoke. The animals are afraid, and so am I. Our fear is all shadows, snapped bone sharp. The deer mice don't know what death is, yet they run anyway. It's instinctual for us. The running, I mean. The smoke strangles me. I can't breathe right. Have I ever done that? Inhaled properly? I take showers for the steam, and it eases the pain, but not the rot. This place is trying to kill me, and I'm not sure the land understands me anymore. Or am I just not listening? Thank you. I am so pleased to announce our final reader of the evening, the wonderful, stupendous Flannery James.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you for that beautiful piece. So I'll be reading an excerpt from an essay about eco-anxiety, invasive species, and Staten Island. And the title of the piece is Transformalgia. Solastalgia is a term coined by an environmental philosopher to describe the feeling that one has when one's home has been utterly and destructively transformed in front of one's eyes. I have experienced solastalgia, though I have not lived through any environmental disasters. That is, other than the background catastrophe of climate change that we are all facing. I have felt it on a 70-degree day in December. I have felt it walking home on late summer nights, passing pool after pool of empty street lamp light, all ominously devoid of the throngs of insects I remember from my childhood. I have felt it accumulating around me like the dust of an autumn without rain. But now I feel it in Staten Island, in a place I've never lived before, in a land of which I have no ecological memory. My unease is not proper solastalgia, since I have never known Staten Island and Clay Pit Ponds in a pristine state, but rather distress prompted by ongoing change. What to call it? Transformalgia? The ecosystem is undergoing such profound turmoil that even I, a resident of 3 months, can sense it. The red maples, which my coworkers tell me used to produce gallons of sap per day, eke out a few yellowish drops per week during sugaring season. 40 trees barely yield enough sap to boil 2 pocket-sized bottles of syrup. Cranberries, which were abundant in bogs all over the park a few years ago, have vanished. Tappan's Pond, one of the last known refuges in the state of the endangered eastern mud turtle, has been overrun by red-eared sliders. There is no equilibrium on Staten Island, but should I expect anything else from New York City, the most cosmopolitan city in the world? People and neighborhoods are constantly in flux. Borders shift or dissolve overnight. The urban landscape is constantly made anew. Why not the ecological landscape too? One of Staten Island's newest landscapes, in a very literal sense, is Fresh Kills Park. The 2,200-acre park, built on top of the infamous Fresh Kills landfill, is currently only open to the public through guided tours. On a recent sunset hike, I found myself marveling at the grasslands stretching north towards the Manhattan skylands like the field of poppies before Oz. It wasn't just the open expanse of rolling hills that felt freeing after weeks in the forest. The grasses all around me have been carefully selected from seeds donated by the Greenbelt Native Plant Center. Red-winged blackbirds and eastern meadowlarks darted overhead. 17 species of lichen had been cataloged within the park boundaries. A lone coyote, perhaps the only one in the whole borough, had been caught on trail cameras. Sedge wrens, absent from New York City since 1960, were nesting on a nearby hillside. Everything there belonged. Except, of course, nothing belonged there. I was standing on top of a capped landfill full of carcinogens and methane and rubble from the World Trade Center. The soil under my feet was so new, so sterile, that mushrooms hadn't even begun to grow there yet. The pristine nature around me was constructed, artificial, unnatural, and it won't last. As the park opens to visitors, seeds and eggs and larvae will hitch rides on their shoes. Feral cats will climb fences. Starlings and lanternflies will alight on the few scraggly trees. Someone will set their pet turtle free in the marsh. In a decade or two, fresh hills may come to resemble clay pit ponds, not on the surface, not literally, but in the push and pull of old and new, the ebb and flow of introduced and native. It is worth remembering when I find myself gripped by transformalgia that I am not native to this place, not to Staten Island or New Jersey, both the homelands of the Lenape people. I'm not native to any one land. I can no more go back to Ireland or China than a trifoliate orange can return to Korea or a grove snail to Spain. Like all non-native things, I have found myself in a strange and ever-changing place. I'm trying to grow here. Thank you.
Wow, I am just thrilled with these readings. What a treat. Each piece was a treasure, honestly, and you've invested so much time and care and dedication to all of these. I'm truly impressed. Thank you, readers, for sharing your marvelous work. Thank you, audience, for joining us and for enthusiastically supporting our program and our writers. To conclude, if you'll all indulge me, I'd like to read a short poem, not my own. And one reason is that many of our thesis students this semester have included their own poetry in their theses. Nobody read a poem tonight, but the poems I've read from these manuscripts are just wonderful. So I thought I would share a short poem. It's by Langston Hughes, and I'm sure it will be familiar to many of you. It's called Dreams. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. So hold fast to your dreams, writers, and thank you again for sharing your work this evening. Good night, everybody.